Hello, good morning. Hi, everyone. Really lovely to have so many of you here with us today for what is going to be an epic conversation. I can see everyone trickling in now. Hello, hello. I'm Lucy, COO here at Strive, and this is one of those sessions that I have genuinely been looking forward to because it matters so much. And the fact that so many of you are showing up tells me that you feel the same. And honestly, it's a topic I've sat a lot with myself. As someone who leads a small team and, we really care deeply about culture, I know what it feels like to want to get this right and sometimes say nothing because I wasn't sure how. When I first got started thinking about hosting this session, I also had a moment of what if I get this wrong, which is exactly what Shurron is going to unpack today. While we're waiting for people to join, I can see the numbers are still kind of trickling in a little bit. Please do say hello in the chat. Throughout this session, we want this to feel like a real conversation and a place for you to network and meet folk in similar organisations or with similar challenges. So let us know your name, let us know where you're joining from, and if you're up for it, what's brought you here today. Feel free to share your LinkedIn profile links too if you're looking for new connections. You're all an amazing part of the Strive community, and it's so lovely to see you all connecting. So please do make the most of everyone in the chat. One thing though, please make sure your chat is set to everyone. You'll notice when you click on the chat bar, there's a little bar at the bottom of your screen. Click on chat, you'll notice there's a little blue drop down. Just toggle that to everyone, please. Otherwise, Shurron and I will get all your lovely messages and no one else will. We want this to feel like a real conversation. So throughout the session, use the chat, react, share what's really landing for you. You can also share what's going on at your organization too. The last few webinars, people have shared the most amazing work they're doing, and it's been a great space to kind of sorry, totally lost my train of thought there. I can see the chat starting to go already. It's been a great space to really learn from other people and to understand what's going on and the amazing work that you're all doing. So it's been a really great space, like I was saying, to learn from each other and get new ideas. There's also a Q&A feature at the bottom. You'll notice that next to the chat. That's your space to submit questions to us. We are working the Q&A a little differently this webinar. Instead of answering them live, we're working with some pre-submitted questions and we'll be following up with you all individually to answer all of your Q&A questions. So please don't be shy, submit your questions. Shurron and I will be working through them. I don't think I've asked Shurron for her help on that, but any questions that are submitted, we'll tag team those. It's a great opportunity to get some extra feedback and support. And one small ask, if today gave you something useful, maybe a reframe, maybe a framework to try, I know Shurron has some amazing things she's going to be sharing, or just maybe the permission to have a conversation you've putting off, please do share it on LinkedIn, in your team meeting, wherever feels right. The more we normalize talking about this stuff at work, the easier it gets for everyone. Now, a quick word on why we're here, and then we'll get into the good stuff. Most organisations have really amazing intentions around inclusion. The policies exist, the training gets scheduled, people genuinely care, and I can see a lot of you here caring today. But caring is also what can kind of freeze us a little bit because we really don't want to get it wrong, and that fear can take over. That fear of saying the wrong thing, that fear of opening a can of worms, that fear of professional fallout, all of that is quietly shaping behaviour in a way that has a real cost. And here's the thing, that cost of staying silent is almost always higher than the cost of getting it wrong, owning it and learning from it. And that's what today is about, to help with that connection between you all and to help us see where you're at with your journey. We've got a poll or two we'll be running, and I'm just going to pop the first one live right now. Hopefully that's all popping up for you. And before I introduce our guest, for those joining Strive for the first time, a very warm welcome. It's so nice to have you here. We're employee engagement survey software, and the short version is this. Most survey tools give you data. We're built for HR teams who are done with surveys that go nowhere. We help HR teams kind of run surveys that actually go somewhere, clear results, clear next steps, without the usual faff of chasing responses and making sense of the data afterwards. We work with some really brilliant organisations, London Zoo, UK Space Agency, and Newcastle United Foundation among them, and we're always happy to chat. So please do get in touch after today if it's something you're thinking about. And now to our guest. Shurron Rosales is an inclusion specialist who supports organisations to be more inclusive, and what makes her approach genuinely distinctive is that she brings both professional expertise and lived experience. As a South Asian woman and a parent carer, Shurron doesn't just speak about inclusion from the outside; she truly speaks from it within it. Her approach is grounded in so much honesty and so much vulnerability that it's just going to be the most amazing conversation ever. She shares no pressure. She's sharing best practice. She's sharing mistakes, which I think all give us so much confidence and heart that we're all in this together and we're all kind of just trying to do our best. And what she knows she's offering is real learning too. And that's exactly the spirit of today's session, is understanding that we're all working together and trying our best to make little changes every day. We are so, so lucky to have her with us. I know it's going to be a treat. And Shurron, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And it's so good to see everyone. I've got my eye over here on everyone in the chat. So, really good to see some familiar names and some new names. And I really look forward to connecting with you all. So, I'm Shurron Rosales. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an inclusion specialist, I'm an unpaid carer, and I'm a parent. And I come to you today with my giant mug of tea, which is almost as big as my head, which is a Yorkshire Gold, if anyone was wondering. We had a bit of chat about what tea is our favourite earlier. Um, but I'm here today to talk to you about why I think fear is costing us more than mistakes when it comes to inclusion work. So let's get started by talking about mistakes. So I have two little kids and they make mistakes all the time. So this week alone, we've had the potion from random stuff from the garden spilt all over the kitchen counter. We've had forgetting to zip up the school bag and losing the gloves. And we've had flooding the bathroom floor after leaving the shower screen open. But I tell my kids, like, it's okay to make mistakes. We all make them. It's how we learn. So I'm just going to take a giant glug of tea. I've just realized I'm not going to drink this tea, am I? Because I'm just going to be talking so much. There you go. That was worth it. So we usually clean up together or fix the mistake, and we talk about what we might do differently next time. But when we're grown up, like the message we get can feel really different, especially in our workplace, depending on the culture. Like that mistakes aren't okay. They're something to be avoided at all costs. And so they feel dangerous. They feel like they might be career ending or friendship breaking. And when we do make them, I think it can feel like there's a pressure to hide them. And that just compounds things, right? Like if everybody's doing their messy, uncomfortable learning behind the scenes, it can feel like we're the only one making mistakes in this area. And I think social media and cancel culture like amplify this. Mistakes can feel really permanent and public. In a world of screenshots and call outs, like it's no wonder some of our professional instincts can be just to hide. So, putting my big girl pants on up to my chin, and in an effort to normalize mistakes, and especially ones around inclusion, here are some of my biggest mistakes this month, just this month. So, I scheduled an in-person meeting during Ramadan without checking first. I assumed a doctor that someone mentioned in a meeting was male, super cringe. And I wished my mum friends happy Holi on completely the wrong day. And these mistakes, like they all had different impact. The Holi comment was met with this like roar of laughter and just the most massive amount of ribbing because I'm Indian and they were just giving me so much stick for not knowing my own cultural calendar. But the Ramadan meeting, well, my Muslim colleague, he had to ask me to move the meeting, and that was work for him. And he felt overlooked. Like, that's not small. So mistakes do matter. They can offend, they can exclude, they can do real harm. But the key thing that I want you to take away from today about mistakes is that they are repairable. And that it's what we do after a mistake, how we repair, how we apologize, how we take responsibility and change. It matters more than the mistake itself. And instead of being like career ending or relationship breaking, they can be an amazing catalyst for growth and learning and actually doing better. And there are frameworks for how we can do this. And I have even have my own that I teach. And we don't have the time to like dive into the detail of that today. So if you're interested, get in touch with me. I can send you more information. But what I want us to hold in our minds today is that mistakes aren't the end. They can in fact be a really incredible beginning. So if mistakes are repairable, why then do we feel so much fear to make them? And so the first thing I'll say here is that feeling fear of mistakes is just totally normal. It's our natural reaction. Like our natural reaction to getting something wrong is usually protection rather than like curiosity or courage. We might hide, we might want to avoid, we might want to stay quiet. That is completely human. Our brains are wired to keep us safe, but they're not great at distinguishing between like real danger and social discomfort. So to my brain, the risk of saying the wrong thing, it can feel pretty similar to like a physical or a real threat. So in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world, like I see fear that falls into generally three patterns. There are more, but these are the kind of main buckets. So the first is the fear of causing harm. So many of us, most of us, and I'm going to hazard a guess, nearly everyone on this call, because we've all shown up to this talk, care deeply about getting it right. And we're terrified that we might do something wrong, upset someone, make a situation worse. Secondly, it's the fear of opening the can of worms, like afraid that if we ask someone their needs, we don't know how to meet them. We fear the complexity of the unknown, of the what do I have to do it for everyone? We fear that more than the cost of exclusion. And third, it's the fear of professional fallout, that perfectionism that tells us that our reputation's on the line. The fear that one wrong word will create like a grievance, a lawsuit, a social media call out will be cancelled forever. So we're going to touch on all of those today, but I want to spend most of my time on the first one, like the fear of causing harm, because it's something I'm seeing a lot in my work and one that I think that we have the most agency or an ability to change first. So I might take another sip of tea. Why did I make such a big cup of tea, you're wondering? Mm. So for many reasons, we've absorbed this idea that silence or inaction is the low risk option and it's safer for our careers, for our organizations than making a mistake. But that safe option, choosing to say nothing or avoid getting it wrong, do nothing, it comes with a hidden cost. And I want to tell you how this plays out, or how I see this playing out with my 8-year-old son. So he has a severe learning disability. He communicates differently from other children his age. He communicates with noises, through signing, through gestures, and he has a choice board. And when his little sister was born, when he was 2.5 years old, my husband and I, like, we noticed something super interesting and that hurt a bit, is that our friends would talk to her more than him. She doesn't have a learning disability. She doesn't have one. And it wasn't that our son didn't want to communicate. That wasn't it. So we didn't know what it was. And I plucked up the courage to ask one of my bestest friends in the whole world and kind of ask her what she thought might be going on. And she thought about it really hard. She was super thoughtful about it. And I think she dug really deep. And she told me that she was afraid that she would get something wrong and upset him because how he communicated, that was unfamiliar to her. And so what she said, like, it made sense to us. We saw that this is what was happening across the board with our friends. They weren't avoiding, or they were avoiding communicating with our son, but not because they didn't care. It was the opposite. Like they were stuck in that first pattern of fear. But because of that fear, like he was the one who paid the price. I did not expect to feel so emotional about this. I guess maybe another sip of tea. He was the one who was left out. And it's what I see in workplaces. People care, they want to do the right thing, but that caring can be the very thing that freezes them. But really, the only way we'll never make a mistake is if we don't try at all. And that means someone else paying the price, just like my son did. So that's what the first fear looks like in action, like that fear of causing harm. But in workplaces, I see the other two fears playing out just as powerfully. So we might see the can of worms when a can of worms fear, when a manager like won't ask a carer what support they need or how to support them adequately because they're terrified that they won't have the budget or they can't find the perfect solution. So they don't ask. And that carer is left unsupported and not able to do their best work. And we might see the professional fallout fear when a comms team removes any mention of trans people from their Pride campaign, like terrified of the backlash. They choose safety over actually showing up for the people who need to see themselves represented. And that avoidance, it has a far greater cost to the effectiveness of our organizations. Like we miss out on ideas, innovation, talent, to our workplace culture. Like we build teams that are weaker, not stronger, and to the people already experiencing exclusion who carry the weight of our silence. Like we all lose in that. So let's take the examples out of my living room and back to the office. And I want to show you how these three fears, so causing harm, opening the can of worms, facing professional fallout, how they can create a trail of exclusion within the workplace. And I want to tell you about an organization I worked with. So their diversity, equity, and inclusion work had big plans, but they were not making the progress they'd hoped for. So they brought me in to do some listening work to understand what was really happening through interviews, through focus groups, through data analysis. And what I found was that their teams had really low confidence when it came to equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and really high fear. And that fear was present at the most basic level of human interaction, names. They were afraid to pronounce their colleagues' names wrong, typically non-English names. And it might seem harmless at first, or at least minimal. But what we discovered is that it wasn't. People were avoiding using the names of their colleagues, of these colleagues, entirely. And that led to a very specific kind of avoidance, the avoidance of a kitchen chat. So we're losing the opportunity to build a relationship, avoiding asking their opinions in meetings, missing out on their contribution, avoiding working together on projects, all because they'd need to use their names to do those things. They chose silence because they thought that was the safe option. But the funny thing is, during those focus groups, we did an exercise where we discussed music, TV shows, and films with a specific purpose in mind, and you'll see, because guess what? Those same people who were too afraid to use their colleagues' names and to get it wrong, they could pronounce Tchaikovsky, Daenerys Targaryen, Albus Dumbledore. It's a true story. It's a true story. So why could they pronounce those, but they were too afraid to try these others? It might be easy to think, they just didn't care. But the listening work showed the opposite was true. They cared about getting it wrong. But Daenerys Targaryen wasn't in the room the first time they said her name. So there was like zero risk of offending her if they fluffed it. No fear. Plus, when they're watching Game of Thrones, they heard the pronunciation over and over. They had a script. For anyone who's watched Game of Thrones, she said her name a lot, the full version. But with their colleagues, no practice, no script, a real person in front of them who could be hurt. So caring a lot combined with the fear of getting it wrong was the thing that stopped them. And there was something else that made that fear even stronger. And I'm going to simplify something that is incredibly complex here for the sake of time. But centuries of colonialism and racism have shaped what names we're taught are normal, and I'm using air quotes, Anglo, Western European names, and which are too hard. So when people encountered names like outside of that norm, hopefully that's the last time I'll do that. Those fear patterns showed up. Like they didn't want to offend. They didn't have a script for how to repair if they got it wrong. And they were terrified of the awkwardness of being corrected publicly, of being like labeled as not inclusive. So again, they chose that safe option, or what they thought was safe, but a price was being paid for that silence. The people whose names weren't being used, they weren't being called on in meetings. They were being overlooked for projects. They were missing out on promotions. They felt othered and wondered why they didn't fit in. And they were leaving the organization at a higher rate. And the data backed all of this up. And here's the thing is that nobody knew this was even happening. It was the listening work that revealed this, because fear doesn't announce itself, right? Like we don't just walk around being like, I'm avoiding you because your name is hard. Like that you just do, because it's a very subtle kind of thought pattern. And it wasn't until we created that space to reflect that it revealed that all of this was happening. So when we let fear drive our choices, we shift the biggest cost onto the people already experiencing exclusion, even though we all do pay. And so for HR specifically, this matters because fear-driven avoidance creates real costs. So I'll give you 3 examples. They're brief. So a manager doesn't give honest feedback to a disabled employee because they're worried it will come across as insensitive. So that person never gets the development that they need to move forward, to progress in their career. And we know that this happens because UK research consistently shows that disabled employees report getting significantly less career development and promotion opportunities than their non-disabled colleagues. That's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of honest, courageous conversations, as well as other factors at play. My second example, a Black colleague gets pushed into a formal HR process for something that would normally be handled with a quiet word. Why? Well, because that manager is afraid of getting it wrong and thinks, I better cover myself legally just in case. And the NHS workforce data, it shows exactly this. Black and minority ethnic staff, they're far more likely to end up in formal disciplinary processes than white staff for the same kind of issues. And in HR, we call this hyperformalization. And it happens because people are too afraid to have an informal conversation and for it to be clumsy. So they let the safe, or what they think is the safe process, do the talking instead. And then my third example, so someone leaves flexible working out of a job advert because they're thinking, well, what if everyone asks for it? Like, how would I even manage that? Like, they're afraid of opening that can of worms. So they just don't mention it. And research shows that when ads don't mention flexibility, we lose huge numbers of parents, carers, disabled candidates before they even apply. We've just missed out on a great hire because we were too afraid to open that can of worms that probably was doable. And we've not allowed those people to do their best work. So we've seen what fear actually does, like at a personal level and at an organizational level. So let's move to talking about what we do when it shows up, because it will show up. The question isn't, how do I eliminate fear? Because we're no wizard like Albus Dumbledore, and we don't have like almighty powers to do that. That would be pretty ridiculously all-powerful of us. Instead of that, the question is, how do we notice the fear and take action anyway? So on your screen shortly will appear my one slide of the presentation. I don't know if that's a relief to anyone or there we go. Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. So this is the framework that I use myself and that I use with the teams that I work with. So accept it, notice it, shift it, and take action. And I want to just start by being quite clear about something, is that this framework is for all of us. But I'd be really naive to pretend that trying and getting it wrong costs us all the exact same. Because it's true that people from marginalized communities or who are in the minority at work can have a lot less permission to mess up than those in the majority. If we've got more safety, if we're more senior, if our jobs are secure, or if we're in the majority group, we've got more room to take risks. And that means that we've got more responsibility to kind of go first with this stuff. So that feels really important to recognize. And it's also important to recognize that marginalized folks can also cause harm especially in areas where they don't have lived experience. I mean, I just gave you my list from this month, right? Just because I'm brown, it doesn't mean I can't make mistakes when it comes to, say, disability or any other area, or that I won't feel that fear of messing up. So this framework is for everyone. So as we go into it, I want you to think about your own example. So maybe a time when you weren't sure what to say, or when you didn't ask someone what they needed, or when you just avoided a whole situation entirely. And as we go through the framework, try and keep that in your mind. It will make it more real. Okay. Tea sip break. And dramatic pause. Okay. So here's the framework. So first, and this is a big one, is that we accept that we will make mistakes because it's part of being human. It won't define our character when we do, but it will mean that we have to take accountability, apologise, learn from it, and do something differently. But by accepting that mistakes are inevitable, we stop treating them like these mega catastrophes, and they become something that we can actually prepare for and fix rather than something to avoid at all costs. And that's when fear starts to shrink, or it certainly holds less power. So second is notice when fear is showing up. So think about your own example, the one you've brought that you're holding in your mind, and think about how it felt for you. So for me, it's tightening in my chest. It's like tingly fingers, flushed in my cheeks, sudden urge to look at the floor, a voice saying, don't say anything, don't ask, don't make it awkward. My brain is reacting as if this is danger, but it's not. I'm not unsafe, I'm uncomfortable, and those aren't the same things. So we name it. We tell ourselves, I'm feeling fear, I'm not in danger. And then we shift it. And this is the most powerful step, because when fear shows up and our brains become completely obsessed with ourselves, like so self-focused, and we're just asking ourselves, what if I get it wrong, and doom spiraling, there are two questions that can really help us shift out of that freeze. And they're there on the screen. So the first question is this fear protecting someone else, or is it just protecting me? Because sometimes fear is actually telling us something pretty important. So, for example, like if we're thinking about International Women's Day and posting on social media about it, but our parental leave policy is like years out of date and working mothers are really struggling and unhappy in our organization, working parents, should I say, listen to that fear, like fix the policy first, because if that post is sent, it will land as performative and empty, and it will tell our working mothers and parents that they're not important enough to do the real work, but we'll just take the easy option of celebrating, a celebratory post once a year. That's not fear stopping us. That's awareness telling us, I think we might be about to do harm here. But if the fear is, this might be awkward, I might say something slightly wrong, someone might correct me, how am I going to look? Will they think I'm a bad person? That's avoidance fear. That's not it's protecting us, not them. And when it is avoidance fear, we can ask a second question. And it's up there. Who pays the biggest cost if I don't do anything? And then we actually answer it. So, who pays if I don't say their name? They do. They're excluded and they feel like they don't belong. Who pays if we don't ask what they need? They do. They're left unsupported. Who pays if we cancel the whole thing? They do. They miss out on connection. When we see who actually carries the biggest cost of our silence or inaction, like the fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes harder to let it win because we're not just thinking about ourselves now, we're thinking about them. And that shift is what can make action possible. So that brings us on to the fourth point, take action. And the question is, well, what do we actually do? And of course, it's going to depend on what kind of situation it is. But I've broken it down into kind of three broad areas. Because if it's basic knowledge we need, we can learn it ourselves, right? Like how to pronounce a common name. I'm actually curious to know if you put my name into AI or Google, like how it would say to pronounce it. But the internet can help us with these things, with pronunciations. What like religious holidays, like how to celebrate or wish someone, uh, forgive me for messing up my words, but thinking about how to offer someone, a moment to recognize their religious holiday, basic terminology, like all of these things we can look up and it can take minutes. If it's about one person specifically and we can't necessarily like look it up, we can ask them. So that's our second point. If fear is making us afraid to do that, it's about really leaning in and asking anyway. So I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Can you tell me one more time? I'm going to write it down phonetically because I don't want to have to ask you again to keep asking you, but it really matters to me that I get this right. Or is there anything else that would help you in this role? We're asking the person that actually knows. And if it's about a group, so for example, like redesigning how your team works, changing recruitment practices, planning an initiative, involve people with lived experience. Because if we're redesigning our flexible working policy, we're going to want to involve parents, carers, disabled people in shaping it from the start. Because if we're designing it for them, then we'll feel the fear of getting it wrong. If we're designing it with them, we're listening, we're learning, and we're doing it together. So it's about moving from I'm too scared to try to I'm willing to start, I'll learn, I'll try, and I'll adjust. So here's an example of what this looks like in practice. So a manager at an organization I was working with, or he was responsible for team socials, and he got some feedback that the pub that they always went to, like for every single social, wasn't fully accessible for disabled people. And also the fact that all team socializing centered around drinking was excluding other members of the team. And it became a bit of a debate in his team, and it was pretty polarizing. That fear completely overwhelmed him, and especially the polarization, kind of feeling that he needed to like pick a side. And the thought of meeting everyone's needs felt entirely impossible to him. So his first thought was to cancel all socials forever. Can you imagine? That's what felt safer to him. But the framework really helped him to ask, who actually pays if they cancel? Well, yeah, of course, the whole team loses connection. They'll be less effective. And those colleagues who the original socials were excluding would be made to feel like they were the reason for it. So further marginalizing them. So instead of cancelling, he did his basic internet research to get an awareness of inclusive events and socializing. And then in his team meeting, he owned it and said that, like, I've been getting this wrong and I'm worried about how I'm going to meet everyone's needs. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to, but this matters a lot that we try. So can we figure this out together? And they did. And what they ended up landing on was rotating socials, so different venues at different times, which worked for people with caring responsibilities who it hadn't even been raised that this group was being excluded. It was only when they redesigned what socials looked like, they could now be included. They were like this invisible group. And they always started somewhere non-alcoholic, and then whoever wanted to ended up in the pub. Not perfect, but more connected. And across the year, the team's needs were being met. So that's the framework in action. But if we're leading other people, there's a whole other layer, because leaders shape how teams experience fear, right? So through what we model, through how we coach, and what we design into our systems. So let's take a minute to talk about what that actually looks like. And Lucy, you can probably take the slide off now, but maybe post into the chat in case anyone wants to refer back to the framework at any point. And I'm going to take me another giant glug of Yorkshire tea. Or two. Okay. So here are three things that really help when we're leading teams through fear. So firstly, we model it because our teams watch what we do more than what we say, right? When we freeze in front of everyone, or we're obviously in discomfort, they learn this isn't safe. When we try anyway and talk about it, they learn, oh, okay, yeah, mistakes probably won't end us. And when leaders pretend like they never make mistakes, then it just reinforces this culture that everybody's terrified to make them. And I saw this work really well years ago when I was a fundraiser, actually. A director of a fundraising team that I worked in, she was in a meeting, and there's probably about 30 of us in the room. And someone asked her, like, why only certain events were marked on the fundraising calendar. So we had like an employee fundraising calendar, but only certain events were on there as moments to kind of fundraise around. And she totally owned it. Like, she could have got super defensive. She just owned it and said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, like there's been 2 decades probably since this happened. So, but she said something like, you're right. I know I've needed to review the calendar, but I've been really freaked out about how to handle it. I'm scared we're going to miss something or that someone's going to complain. So I've just not done it. And right there, she was just normalizing that this stuff can feel scary and that the desire to make it perfect can mean that we avoid it. And then she made it priority to co-create the calendar in the next meeting with the team. So she gave everyone permission to try to contribute even when they didn't have the perfect answer. And of course, I didn't know anything about this framework back then. But I think when I look back, I can see that she was following it without any of us knowing what it was. And that's what modeling looks like. And it can sound like, I got that wrong. Thank you for pointing that out. Or let me try that again. Or, yeah, I'm still learning here too. Thank you for that. We're showing our teams that mistakes aren't career ending, they're learning. Fear is normal, that catching ourselves is possible and trying matters more than perfection. So the second thing is validate and guide. So when someone in our team is stuck in fear, don't dismiss it. We can use the framework with them, but we'll add on one thing, which is we validate how they're feeling. So let's say a manager comes to you and says, I need to give feedback to a team member who's disabled, but I'm worried it's going to come across as discriminatory. Should I just not? Like, we could say, just give the feedback, they need to hear it. But like, that dismisses the fear and they're probably still going to be frozen. So instead we could say, I get why this feels delicate and I get why you're putting so much thought in it. You don't want to cause harm. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation. Thanks for coming to me. We're valuing and validating the intent. Then we might move on to, but let's think about who pays the price if you stay silent. They do. They're being set up to fail without being given the tools to improve. So we shift the focus. And then we might ask them, what if you ask them what they need to succeed in the role? And you give them honest feedback, like you would for anyone else. What would that look like? We're helping them to see what trying looks like. We're offering them possibility rather than shutting everything down. So we're showing them the shape of action, that there's a way forward, that trying is possible, but obviously they'll own the specifics of what they actually do. We're not solving it for them, but we're showing them the questions to ask themselves. And then third, designing the culture. So we've talked about what we do as individuals and how we coach our teams, but there's a third layer, and that's where HR and leaders have a lot of power. It's culture. And culture isn't just what's written in our value statement. It's like what actually happens when someone makes a mistake. It's the unwritten rules that tell people, is it safe to try here or is it just safer to stay quiet? And here's the thing is that fear doesn't just live in people, it lives in our systems. So when managers are afraid of getting it wrong, especially with colleagues from marginalized groups, like they can over formalize everything. And that can then be, our systems can be perpetuating that. And we saw that with the NHS data of Black and minority ethnic employees. And that creates the exact kind of thing we're trying to avoid, like distance, formality, less honest conversations. But when our teams know that that mistakes can get corrected and repaired and moved on from, the fear goes down. So have a look at what our systems are actually teaching. Like, do our performance reviews reward learning and feedback and growth and like, properly evidencing these, or just smooth delivery and like, no complaints? Do our leaders talk publicly about what didn't work and what they adjusted, or do they just share wins? Is repair part of normal conversation, or is it something people do quietly, hoping that no one notices? Do we train our people on how to repair if we make a fluff up? That's important training. Like once we give people the language, it's right there in their memory banks. Because our systems are either teaching people stay quiet and you'll be safe, or take responsibility, repair, and keep going. And that is what decides whether fear wins or whether people try. And when we lead like this, we're not solving one problem at a time. We're teaching our team that discomfort is actually a signal to lean into, not to run away from. Because remember, our goal isn't to eliminate mistakes. It's not to not feel fear. It's to not let the fear of mistakes stop us from doing the thing. So, as I wrap up here today, I want to bring the conversation back to my son. I always do this. Why not? Um, it took some of my closest friends years to feel comfortable enough to try communicating with him. And now, lucky them, they get to experience the absolute joy of communicating with him, getting to know him, sharing his obsession with Mr. Tumble and rice cakes, sharing his humor, his personality. But it took years because they cared so much. They were terrified of getting it wrong. And how many people in our workplaces are waiting for someone to just try? How many campaigns aren't being launched? How many policies aren't being changed? How many people aren't being hired because we're choosing our comfort over their inclusion without even knowing? So next week or next month, or possibly even today, we might feel that feeling again, that sign that we're feeling fear. Might be a name, might be a conversation, a piece of feedback, a policy that needs updating, a campaign we've been too afraid to run. A friend yesterday told me she wanted to wish her one of her son's carers a happy Eid, but she didn't want to say it wrong, so she didn't do it. This happens all the time in everyday life. We'll recognize it. Well, the key is to recognize it and recognize that it shows up as discomfort. And in that moment, we have a choice. We can remind ourselves this is fear, not danger. And we can ask those key questions. Who's this protecting? Who pays if I don't act? And we can take action to make our workplaces more inclusive. The cost of trying and messing up, that's repairable, right? But the cost of not trying at all, we all pay. We lose the ideas, the innovation, the talent, the stronger teams. But the people excluded, the people whose names aren't being used, who aren't getting opportunities, whose needs aren't being discussed and met, who aren't represented, they pay the most. So this week or this month or even today, let's try. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was wow, there's so much to think about there, and I've definitely been taking a lot of my own notes, and I suspect a lot of you have too. So much good stuff to take away and change about my day. Oh, Jem saying we've just clapped in our living room, like you can hear us. So lovely. So I want to go into questions because we've got some great ones to talk about, and I think yeah, that says everything. The comments are just lighting up. So that says everything today about you know, how much what you've shared and what you've talked about has really resonated. We've got about 10 minutes to go through questions. So I think the first one is, obviously we've spoken a lot about mistakes, and I realise I definitely made one at the start of this webinar because I absolutely pronounced your surname wrong. So there's one that I will share for today, owning up and owning that in front of our full audience live. Yeah, we'll see how that mistake plays out, but I'm sure with everything you've shared today, we can all learn and grow from it, like you said. Yeah, we've seen that kind of fear is central to a lot of the things that kind of fuel our concerns about making mistakes. Um, we've talked a little bit about kind of how it looks to respond to mistakes. I know you shared some amazing examples, but you know, for example, for me going forwards, or for others thinking about, you know, their day to day and their weeks, what would kind of two or three things look like when we're responding to a mistake well? Um,
Thank you. And also, Lucy, I feel like people are going to think we planned this. You've just totally owned your mistake.
oh,
And also, if we were let's I was actually like, oh, we'll talk about it after, but let's not. Let's talk about it now.
yeah,
The learning from it that I've learned when I've mispronounced people's names is to just check before, like actually, I guess in our
I should
pre
have.
call, we just be like, oh, can I just check how I pronounce your name? And that's the simple learning that we just take forward for the rest of our lives, and that's the end of it. So you
Thank
saw
you.
it here, everyone. Live learning. Okay, so the question, let me check that I've got it. So it's how do we respond to mistakes well? Okay, and you're
Yes.
over here, which is why I'm going to try and look at my camera and you at the same time. I have a framework on this, which I'm keen. I mean, I can talk about that in an hour. So I might not go into the details of that, but if anyone wants to see it, I can certainly share it with them. There are loads of frameworks that are just out there for anyone to have a look at from lots of different professionals. But I think probably the thing I think might be most relevant or helpful in just a snippet of time to everyone on the call is the kind of treading on toes analogy. So I had a colleague who changed their name. So they then went with a chosen name. And for those that don't know, the name that someone's born with, or a given name at birth, once somebody's now using a chosen name, that's referred to as their dead name. So when I was talking to this colleague, I used their dead name and they corrected me. And I felt all this huge flood of I'm really sorry. I'm not a bad person. My step kid is non-binary, and I'm a real ally to the community. I wanted to just give this massive spiel. Thank God I held back for a second, um, because actually, the analogy that I've been taught that or was shared with me that works really well for this is imagine it's like when you slip up, it's like treading on someone's toes. When you tread on someone's toes, you didn't mean to, unless you walk around treading on people's toes. I mean, then I can't help you. um, but it was an accident. You don't intend to. So we move away from the intention and we focus on the fact that we've hurt them. Now, one person treading on our toes, it's probably going to be okay. But if 20 people that day have trodden on our toes, we might be a bit sensitive about it. Or the person receiving the toe treading, there's probably a much better way of describing that. And so what we don't want from people is a big spiel about how they don't hate all toes and they're actually a massive ally to the toe community and they, all of this stuff, because the person at the receiving end of that oops moment or that mistake is then having to do a lot of work to comfort them, and make it okay. It makes it all about them. So when you tread on someone's toes, usually you'd say sorry and move on, and maybe just be aware of where you're putting your feet in future. It's as simple as that. So when I used my colleague's dead name, I apologized and said, I won't use that name again. Sorry. And we all moved on with our lives. But I then did do some learning behind the scenes about, and I also practiced. So when you've got someone's name and you keep getting someone's name mixed up, like, oh, Terry and Tony, like I always get you two mixed up, and then it's just there in your mind. I would prep myself, and I'd also prep my apology because um, then I just feared it less because when I accepted I'm probably going to make this mistake, it was then inevitable, so that I could plan for it, and I could plan to reduce the chance of making it, and I could plan my apology.
Practice is one thing over the last few years that I think across everything I do in work is so underrated, and the one thing that actually makes such a difference, whether that's a talk or a webinar or meeting someone, or thinking about the situations where I can make someone more comfortable, or all of those things. It does, yeah, practice really comes through as something that's a tool that really helps me. So it's good to see that that helps you too. I guess going on from that, there's a lot of people on the call that are kind of in HR teams or equality teams, that are looking and thinking about their own initiatives, or wider kind of organization pieces of work. When you're thinking about that team structure, what's a mistake that you've seen maybe a team own brilliantly and then improve from? What's really made the difference there when it's kind of a much broader piece of work?
Yeah, I've seen a team get it pretty wrong actually. And I'm going to do my best. I don't have permission to share this, so I'm going to keep it as vague as possible so that yeah, to respect their privacy. So there was an organization that put on an event, their annual conference, and it it excluded lots of groups. So the most marginalized of their kind of client base, or the people who they supported. Those groups were not heard. And I think it had been a pattern for years and years, but finally the feedback came through. And I think to those organising the event, it felt very scathing. It felt very painful to know that they'd kind of unintentionally caused a lot of harm. I think people felt overlooked and dismissed. And actually, I could. That's where the should we just cancel all events? Kind of the protection of like this just feels safer can kick in. But actually, what that organisation did was absolutely own it. They named the harm that they'd caused. They lent in. They educated themselves. And the following year, I'm trying to condense obviously like a year's worth of learning and work. Um, they then started planning the next year's conference immediately that centered those voices that for the entire history of their conferences had never been represented.
Wow.
So that year there were only marginalized and minority perspectives, and that didn't exclude the majority. That's the thing that people then think, well, what about us? But actually it nobody felt well, actually, I can't say nobody because I didn't individually interview everyone there, but the feedback was overwhelming that there was a joint sense of unity and inclusion. And they addressed some really difficult topics. And it started, I'll just end on this, sorry, is that it started with the most senior person in that organisation standing and saying, we got it so horribly wrong last year and we're sorry for the harm we caused. This is all the things we've done to shape this year's. And it was pretty remarkable. It just created this like it felt like this fertile soil for like we can start again, and the mistakes can be the seeds for like new growth. And for what we saw was a much better, um, more effective, more innovative and fun conference.
What an amazing act for the leaders to stand up there on
So
stage
amazing.
and say
Yeah.
we've made a mistake, and followed that through. I think that creates that culture that I think a lot of us probably exist in, but don't often feel like it's demonstrated day to day, where it's okay to make mistakes. Like you say, it's not going to be career ending. It's not going to be, no one's getting cancelled. It just, we own it, we apologize, and we move on. It's so lovely. Takes a lot of vulnerability as well, I think, which the chat has obviously picked up on today. Vulnerability has come up. It's been the word of the day in the chat. I know you won't have seen it because you've been presenting. I think just one final question before we close. If there's one mindset shift, that's an unfortunate set of words to muddle together. Sorry, guys. Mindset shift you'd want leaders to take away from today. What would it be? Let's try. I'm gonna have the giggles now because I've just seen you got the giggles there.
Sorry. Yes, I do. Um,
Would you
Also,
like
I
me to
think
ask
my
that again?
no, don't. I was just also thinking that I think I saw my dad's on the call. Thanks, Dad. And I never swear around my dad, so that's just made me really laugh that he's
Sorry,
from
Dad.
sorry, Dad. Um, that's really amused me. Um, so one mindset shift is, I mean, I'm trying not to repeat anything that I've said before, but I probably will, is probably just the cost question. So the I think sometimes leaders, I'll use a quick analogy, so I know we're going to be wrapping up, but I've seen leaders, and if anyone's seen me, I've said this in a talk before, so if anyone's seen that, then I'm repeating myself. But I've seen leaders hide away from mistakes because of fear. So this is slightly different because this is like after a mistake has been made, but then it exacerbates the fear of making another. So it is interlinked. And they don't address something that is very obviously hurting or harmed or affected or excluded their people or a group of their people. But it reminds me of when my daughter was little and she used to stand in the middle of the room and be like, I'm invisible, no one can see me. And she's not invisible, she's just very clearly hiding in plain sight. And I
Mm,
think that that's what I would love for leaders to realize, is that actually then just owning that, like the person I just talked about, it it reveals something everyone can see. It can see to a degree anyway, but it shares the inner work, and it creates like that fertile soil. So I suppose it's just I suppose it's that, is that mistakes are not something to hide from because they drive the fear. And actually, we do apply this thinking in many different areas of businesses, but when it comes to inclusion, the risk feels huge because some of the stuff's unfamiliar, or because it then questions our character. Like I'm not sexist, I'm not this, I'm not that. And we can become extra protective. So I hope I answered that okay. I guess I just really wanted to do this in a webinar.
no, you absolutely did. No, that was perfect. And I can see, yeah, a lot of chat, a lot of questions, which we will pick up afterwards. So if you do have any other questions, there's any frameworks you're looking for, I can see some folk have asked for some of the research you mentioned. Do just squeeze it into the chat or the Q&A now, and we will absolutely pick all of that up afterwards. And thank you so much, Sharon. That was so honest, so practical, and genuinely something I think leaves a lot of us feeling a lot more relaxed and confident about the next time we need to hold space for these conversations. Sharon shares so much more of her thinking and expertise over on LinkedIn. We'll drop her details in the follow-up email. It was at the top of this chat as well. So please do connect with her and her work. She's someone so worth having in your feed. I know we spoke, Sharon and I are doing a leadership course actually at the moment with the wonderful Heart Leadership. And we were talking a lot about information diet, and that is something I've been working on a lot, is what I'm consuming. And Sharon is absolutely someone worth getting into your feed and learning more from. I'm just putting our final kind of poll of the webinar live. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for being here today. The interaction from you all has been brilliant. The chats, the lovely things that have been said. It says so much that so many of you showed up, and even the cat is here now as well. Showed up ready to have this conversation so openly. It's so, so lovely to see. We'll be sending a follow-up email shortly with the recording and a few additional resources to help you take today forward in your own organizations. But also just a reminder that if today gave you something useful, please do share it. The more we can have these conversations with our colleagues, with our friends, family, LinkedIn connections, the more we can normalize it, and the easier it gets for absolutely everyone. And if today's got you thinking about how well you actually understand what your colleagues and employees are experiencing, whether that's around inclusion, belonging, or culture more broadly. That's exactly what Stripe is built for. Surveys that reach every employee, surface that honest feedback, and give you something that actually you can actually act on. Get in touch. We'd absolutely love to talk. And thanks again for being here. And thank you, Sharon, for your time. Take care, everyone. And we hope to see you at the next one very, very soon.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Sharon.